you happen to be catching this recording from Jonathan Krause, aka the Futurist founder, here to talk a little bit today about change. Change is difficult for a lot of people, but it's the only thing that you can guarantee in life is that things are going to change. And typically, what we've seen throughout the course of humanity is that human beings tend to hold on to things until they can't anymore. And then oftentimes they're forced to change, right? Because there is some sort of existential forcing function that causes us to reevaluate what it is that we currently hold as a long-standing belief and what we've used to create a value system that is no longer applicable. And so the most obvious case that I can talk about, right, would be the pandemic. And I know that we're 5 years removed from the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're still starting to see the fallout of a lot of the ideological beliefs and value systems that we carried forward from the Industrial Revolution to the fourth Industrial Revolution of the digital epoch. And the biggest issue that we're seeing is the conflict between the digitized, decentralized, and dynamic and diverse world that we live in that is becoming increasingly more intersectional, interconnected, interdisciplinary, and interdependent. And what that means is that we have more stakeholders because we have multiple generations in the workforce for the first time ever in the history of humanity. And we also have the coalescing of emerging technologies, specifically artificial intelligence, which I understand has been around in different iterations for decades. But generative AI really has having its moment right now and is creating this watershed moment for humanity that really allows knowledge workers, specifically individuals like consultants, lawyers, I'd say architects, engineers, people that were used to utilizing large amounts of time and volume and man hours and people hours to construct their frameworks to do their work is now being done in a matter of seconds, literally. And so the idea that we have to continue to have these cattle calls and herd people into offices in order for them to collaborate, to be seen, to be doing work that is actually a creative process is a fallacy. And what we're really seeing is we're seeing that traditional legacy values and belief systems that are indoctrinated into thinking that in-person work is the only way that a lot of these things can get done. And we actually have a generation of people that are more digitally savvy than a lot of the people that they're reporting to. And they're actually starting to push back to say, I don't physically need to be here to do the busy work, quote unquote, the administrative work that I typically have to do because I could actually use AI, whether it's conversational, generative, or predictive, to help me do a lot of this busy work. And I don't necessarily need to commute round trip 3 hours, sometimes upwards of 50 miles to come into an office to continue to do that busy work when I can literally do it anywhere. I can do it from my home office. I can do it from Starbucks. I can do it from my car, which I happen to be sitting in right now with a Wi-Fi connection in my computer, right? To actually create, quote unquote, content or knowledge work that can be dispersed and utilized later. And so when I say that to say it's time to rethink the social contract of work as it relates to how we're going to use emerging technologies and other things to augment the way that work gets done, which actually brings back more time for us to have in-person collaboration, which allows us to create more innovative solutions, but also allows us to put more time back into the things that we care about personally, whether that be our family, whether that be our hobbies, our recreations, our side interests, right? And I think that's where we're seeing younger generations that are figuring out how to monetize their time and their content outside of traditional 9 to 5 work structures on top of what they might be doing to create a life that is more aligned with what their personal values and beliefs are, especially when you think about the cost of living and the exorbitant cost of things like housing, public education, higher education, healthcare, how difficult it is for people to realize the quote unquote American dream of the Industrial Revolution in the digital epic, because with the rise of cost of living, with the rise of healthcare, with how expensive it is to raise children, but there hasn't been meaningful and significant wage increases aside from the top 5% of the people who happen to be in the C-suite, right? Who continue to have exorbitant salaries and exorbitant raises, but the average hourly worker, specifically those that are doing like menial hourly jobs, have not seen the tangible wage increase in decades. And hats off to those small business owners that are finding a way to actually increase the minimum wage that allows them to attract skilled workers that want to come in and actually do some of these jobs that still need to be done. But the ability for traditional leaders, and what I mean by traditional leaders, I mean by people in older generations, and yes, baby boomers, I'm talking to you, that have been indoctrinated into thinking that in-person work is the only way that things can get done, right? Squeezed in between other generations. I happen to be a member of the Generation X generation, or I call it Generation Next or Generation Flex, because now we're coming into our own right to talk about the way that we think that things should be done. But some of us are inheriting these legacy values and beliefs from the older generations and the people that we've reported to and that we've actually found social and professional success through. And other people, such as myself and other individuals that have an entrepreneurial mindset, that experience some of the imbalances in wealth equality, in career advancement, in the ability to realize achieving the dream of home ownership, that have decided to take the entrepreneurial path. But we are actually responsible for creating innovations and solutions that actually create jobs, right? And so if you think about it like that, people that are outside of the sphere of influence of traditional corporate America, who are still reporting to a lot of times legacy values and belief systems enablers, who a large part tend to be individuals of an older generation who aren't necessarily as digitally savvy as Gen Xers, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen Alpha, but still hold a lot of positions of influence and authority. That's why we're seeing so much consternation right now as it relates to how we're going to move forward. Now, having said that, to be fair, and as a board member, I truly believe in being objectively impartial. There is one thing that we haven't talked about, and this is one thing where I think traditional leaders could be honest and transparent, right? And saying, we have collateralized debt obligations to a lot of brick and mortar facilities that are standing unused that still cost us money to maintain. But I would push back and say, this is an opportunity for you to engage with your internal stakeholders to talk about meaningful ways that you can repurpose that as it relates to your collateralized debt on the balance sheet for your profit and loss statements, specifically as it relates to shareholders' expectations on return on investment. And these are the types of conversations that we need to start having in a more broader and transparent manner, because I think that if you literally went to some really smart people and engineers and CPAs and lawyers and mid-level executives and VPs and things of that nature, even sales leaders, right, training and development, these are really smart people. Like, they're not stupid, right? And I have a phrase that says, I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid. But if you come to me and if you come to these really smart, high functioning people and you say, listen, we have a challenge of managing these collateralized debt obligations as it relates to our finances and how we're going to repurpose that. So that's why we're literally calling you back to the office. And oh, by the way, it makes me feel more comfortable if I can actually have eyes on you to see what you're doing. But I think that if we start to have these conversations in a more transparent manner, and we start to talk about the hundreds of millions of feet of unused commercial real estate that are going to potentially become blights on the communities in which they sit, I think that we're going to continue to see this consternation between traditional leaders that want to pull people back to work and people in younger generations that are just kind of like, I don't understand why we're doing these things. And it all comes down to communication and having a transparent dialogue in terms of what it means as an executive leader to have a set of expectations on returning on shareholder values and expectations as it relates to returning value to company owners and company shareholders. In public and private markets, those two things look different, but not really. It's morely about the reporting measures and how those things are actually conveyed to the public. Public companies have a public expectation that they have to meet what they say to Wall Street. Private companies, not so much. Nonprofit companies, we also understand, don't have the same reporting requirements, but the commonality is that all those three separate entities all run on revenue. And so the ability to have a comprehensive strategic roadmap that allows you to think about what are shareholder expectations, what are the financial and fiduciary responsibilities that we're required to meet and uphold to meet those shareholder expectations, what is the best way that we create, capture, and deliver value, and how do we have meaningful discussions that bring more internal stakeholders into those conversations to help us make more better informed decisions about strategically achieving those shared commitments and those shared goals and those shared expectations. I think leaders will find themselves to be in a much better position, because not only will they get more buy-in because their people are going to be seen, valued, and heard, but now they're not going to have those sleepless nights of trying to figure out how they're going to rob Peter, which is the stakeholders, to pay Paul, who are the shareholders. And so again, I just wanted to kind of get on here and kind of talk about that because, I'm seeing it, it's in flux. I know that other people are seeing it as well. We're really kind of looking around trying to say, okay, who's in charge and who's the adult in the room? And I got news for you, Generation Flex. That's us. It's time for us to step up and to start to utilize some of the past experiences of being squeezed between the pre-fax and the e-fax generations to talk about how we can use technology to increase our productivity and our efficiency while also realizing return on investment for shareholder and company owner expectations, especially as it relates to collateralized debt obligations of brick and mortar real estate. And so I think that as we start to look at the landscape of where we currently sit as a country, as it relates to job creation, to increase the GDP, as we look at certain things like tariffs and trade sanctions that might be imposed, as we look at certain things around things about changing like DEI initiatives and how we're bringing more people into the workforce, these are all very serious questions that we need to come together and figure out comprehensive strategies on how to solve, because this is no longer a competing with the people 5, 10, 15, 20 miles away from you or the next state over. This is about how we remain viable and solvent and good stewards in a geopolitical, socioeconomic, global marketplace. And I know that that's a mouthful, but that's where we currently find ourselves. And this is a technology race to figure out who's going to best leverage emerging technologies to augment the social contract of work, to engage more people in meaningful ways to create jobs, which in turn creates wealth, which in turn creates influence in a geopolitical, socioeconomic, global environment. So again, as I wrap up this tangent, as I'm sitting in my car, right, on a random Wednesday afternoon, I just wanted to kind of pop in and say, these are the things that are at stake. And we need people from all walks of life and all generations to be involved in these discussions as it relates to how we're going to overcome some of these challenges. But the good news is that in uncertain times and times of change is when new precedents are set. The only question is going to be is whether or not we have enough people in the older generation, the baby boomers, who see the opportunity for unrealized potential, that are willing to empower the next generation of emerging leaders to allow them to have more of a voice in the discussions about how these things are going to take place, who can then turn around and take the best practices of the things that we've learned in the Industrial Revolution, through the pandemic, the acceleration of the digital epoch, which is the fourth industrial revolution, to figure out how we're going to overcome some of these challenges, right? Come to a common understanding that maybe it's not in-person work versus remote work, maybe it's hybrid work based off of the industry, the business, and the sectors in which they serve, and how leaders are going to be able to position themselves to lead in times of uncertainty with a contingency transformative leadership style for the if this, then that, but if not that, then this, and then this, and then that.